Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome to a new episode from our Orchid Care for Beginners series. Today I'm coming to you live from the oven. It's getting hot in here. Also, one of my windows broke and I cannot really do a draft anymore and it's hot. I think the AC season is upon us. But anyway, back to the video. Today we are going to talk about yellowing leaves. So since this series is aimed more towards, the later stages, not really the very beginning with orchids, yellow leaves will just happen. They will be there, they will happen no matter what you do. And the good news is, many of the times, it's absolutely normal. But there are some times when it's not so normal, or even if it's not normal, it's understandable. So we're gonna talk about those times and just prepare you a little bit for the stuff that maybe you are seeing right now on your orchids, because I'm actually getting a lot of comments on this particular subject. So before we start, this video together with this entire series is of course sponsored by rePotme.com, who offers you everything you could possibly need to properly take care of your orchids, from potting mixes to pots, fertilizers, accessories, grow lights, and everything in between. And not only for orchids, but for other houseplants as well. Side note, I'm using one of their grow lights with an anthurium, and it's actually growing amazing. I thought the light was a little bit dim, but it's actually growing the anthurium amazing. It will outgrow it eventually, but anyway, I'm really happy with how it grows. So I'm gonna link you to the grow lights and other stuff that I really like down below in the description. Feel free to check them out at any time. And with that said, let's get to the video. Do I have a list? Of course I have a list. My memory is not what it used to be. Righty, so you're gonna have chapters down below, of course. Let's start with the normal type of yellowing leaves, the rejuvenation of the leaf system, right? We have root system. I will also call the leaves the leaf system. Now, orchids are continuously growing in one way or another. In the case of Phalaenopsis, you have brand new leaves sprouting from the top every year. In the case of the sympodials, you have brand new pseudobulbs or structures and so on. Well, what happens to the old structures that are maybe a little bit tattered, maybe they're just not functioning to their full capacity anymore? Well, they actually get shed. Even though most orchids we grow are not deciduous, Phalaenopsis are certainly not. They don't lose all of their leaves once a year. They do periodically rejuvenate part of their leaf system. Usually it happens that you lose one or two leaves from the very bottom. The bottom is where the old leaves are. So everything that's on the bottom that just yellows and sheds naturally is absolutely normal. As long as you have a healthy leaf system on top, and also you have a good root system and the orchid looks healthy, it's absolutely normal to lose these leaves. It is also absolutely normal to lose pseudobulbs and leaves on sympodials, such as oncidiums, even dendrobiums. After a number of years, these structures become just too old, and it's part of the regeneration process or well-being process of orchids. In their nature, they do that all the time. We're just not there to see it. And also, all of the parts that yellow in time, they break down. And as they dry, they fall to the ground. The water just takes them to the ground. So typically, even in nature, you'll see orchids with some yellowing leaves. If you've ever Google searched for orchids in their natural habitat, you will see generally the orchids we grow at home look a little bit better and without so many blemishes because we protect them more. But naturally, this happens all the time. Leaves get regenerated, structures get regenerated. The core, let's say, structures of an orchid will not necessarily get regenerated so fast, but the leaves are pretty much the first ones to go. Now, I did say that most orchids we grow are not deciduous, but we also have some deciduous ones. And deciduous means that they periodically lose their leaves, just like deciduous trees do in the winter. So we have some dendrobium types, and we just repotted one like a couple of weeks ago. We also have catasetum types, which also go through a dormancy most of the time. So sometimes, some hybrids don't, but there are some orchids that lose their leaves. They're not the most common ones. It's certainly not necessarily the ones you find in flower shops, but there are some. So in the case of the Dendrobium, Aphyllum, and Anosmum, and all of these species, it's absolutely normal to lose leaves once a year. So not after a few years, because this is the orchid's way to pull those nutrients and focus its energy on blooming. Same with catasetums, and I'm sure there are some other species which do that, like Hestes. We're going a little bit into the territory of not flower shop orchids here, but you might actually be interested in them since I'm guessing you already have the Phalaenopsis, you're doing great with them. I would look definitely into deciduous dendrobiums, into catasetums. They're also very, very easy to grow. I have some tutorials, I'll link to them down below. Like Hestes, I personally didn't have much luck with them because they don't like the heat that I have in my climate, but many people do well with them, and I'm sure there are some other species that lose their leaves. It's absolutely normal, no problem there. Now let's go into the gray area. Even though in this instance losing the leaves is not normal, it's a stress response, it is actually normal or understandable under the circumstance. So let's imagine, in my case, stuff that I deal with on a regular basis, a Phalaenopsis orchid that hasn't been watered properly. It's going into a dehydration stress mode. At this point, the first thing it will do is try to pull energy and moisture from older structures. Even though it's not their time to go, even though it's not rejuvenating, it is pulling energy and moisture from those structures. And it's also shedding structures that consume energy. So it's going a little bit into survival mode. So if you have an orchid, or if you find an orchid at the flower shop that has not been watered properly, and you see the bottom leaves, even 4 leaves are yellowing, but everything else looks pretty okay, that's just survival mode. It isn't normal, obviously. Under normal conditions and normal watering, it would not lose those leaves, but under the circumstance, it doesn't mean it's virused or sick necessarily with an ailment. It just means it's in survival mode. Also, you might have an orchid that you've just rejuvenated, you saved from the flower shop, it doesn't have too many roots. It will probably shed some of those structures that it simply cannot keep. Or maybe it went already through the survival mode and it's now recovering. It might still lose a few structures just to balance the root system with the leaf system. There's always a balance with orchids, especially when it comes to the upper part. First, it all starts from roots. If we have a good root system, we will develop a good leaf system as well. If we don't have a good root system to support all that's happening above, we will not have such an abundant above part as well. So we're gonna shed a few of those leaves just to make sure that the lower part is in balance with the upper part. And I say this because we grow them potted, but generally orchids don't grow potted in their natural habitat. So hope you understand this is just for the ease of talking. So now let's go into the fully not okay area, dehydration. As I was saying, when an orchid gets a little bit dehydrated, it might lose 1, 2 leaves. But if it's consistently dehydrated, it will start to lose leaves pretty badly, and it always starts with the bottom, which is a good thing because we are actually interested in the top in the case of the Phalaenopsis, or we're more focusing on the newer parts of the orchid, no matter what type of orchid. So the good thing with dehydration instances, if you will, is that the orchid will always shed the older parts and pull that energy. So in these cases, it's really easy to save an orchid. Just keep it hydrated. You don't need to do anything, boosters, magical potions, nothing. It just needs water, and it needs it in a consistent manner so that it doesn't have to shed structures, because that's the problem with not having a good watering routine. The orchid will always be like, oh, I have water now, but now I don't have water, and I don't have water for a week. What's going on? Let's start to shed something. But oh, all of a sudden I have water again, so everything is fine. But then all of a sudden I don't have water for another week, so maybe I should shed again some structures. It's this, limbo that makes an orchid kind of not know what to do. Should I grow? Should I go into survival? It's okay now, I'm gonna grow, but then wait, it's survival mode again. I'm gonna stop my new growth or even flower spikes. So having a consistent watering regime absolutely makes sure that your orchid grows normally without having to just linger among survival mode or everything is fine. Another reason why leaves might yellow is rotting. Now that's a big one. Usually, It's rotting of the stems that we're concerned. Leaves on their own, they don't really rot. They have no reason to do that unless we have an infection. Because they're up in the air, they don't stay moist. So when I say rotting issues, I mean either the rhizomes, in the case of sympodials, either the axis, in the case of monopodials, such as Phalaenopsis vandas and other monopodials. Stem rot is not fun. It's definitely not fun because the axis or the main stem of an orchid is its core. That's where leaves grow from. That's where the crown sprouts and all of the roots sprout from. So if we have rotting in the stem, it's sad because the actual orchid is dying. So in that instance, yes, we will start to lose the leaves. Now, depending where the rotting starts, you can start to lose leaves from the bottom or from the top. You can have rotting of the crown only, where you start only from the top, case in which in some cases you can stop the infection, and I have some videos on it. But if the infection or the water trapped in between the leaves is in the middle, it kind of goes both ways. So it starts in the middle and it goes both ways. And I personally, even after so many years, over a decade of growing orchids, I don't have a good solution for stem rot. Sometimes, some treatments work, sometimes they don't. Depends how effective the orchid is. So that's why in cultivation, we need to make sure that we don't leave water trapped in between the leaves. And I will repeat this a lot of times, as long as it takes. Our living room is not nature. We do not work in the same ways. The simple fact that you don't have wind in your living room is enough to promote rotting of the stem and crown. So be careful with that. Next reason why leaves might yellow is lack of nutrients. Now in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean that the leaves will dry and fall, but it could mean that the color of your orchid will not be as vibrant as it should be. Now in my experience, the most common orchids that do this are Phalaenopsis. Since they are a little bit more heavier feeding than other orchids and their leaves linger on, sometimes you can have some yellowing leaves on your orchid. Don't confuse them with overexposure to sun, that's something else. But generally, and especially with the very, very fresh leaves or the bottom leaves, you'll kind of notice either some yellowing patches without having too much sun on your orchid and so on. That could be an indication of under-fertilization, or that maybe your fertilizer lacks some nutrients. I cannot really tell you what nutrient really makes leaves yellow. It can be magnesium, it can be nitrogen, it can be potassium even. I would not encourage you to look at charts, because orchids don't really show deficiencies like other plants because they don't have the same type of grow as other plants. They grow slow. So deficiencies show slow and weird in orchids as well. But yeah, yellowing leaves can actually occur due to fertilizer imbalances, but you would have to really push aside all other reasons to reach that conclusion. There are other reasons which are more common, I would say. So that's why this one is a little lower on the list. But it can happen. Also, very similar to lack of nutrients is too much light, and especially sunlight, but even grow lights. And again, especially with Phalaenopsis, I've had this issue. I have, and I still have, some Phalaenopsis that are absolutely thriving today and they look luscious, which kind of lulled, if I can call it like that, and looked kind of pale for the longest time. And I had them in natural light, not direct sunshine, but very bright light, or they were just very close, very, very close to the grow lights. Again, Phalaenopsis being lower light orchids, I find that some of them really don't appreciate too much light. And even though they were growing okay and blooming okay, the foliage was just a little bit too chlorotic for my eyes. It was just too brightly colored. So the orchid looked fine, it was just that the color was off. It could be a light issue. Next up, infections. I was saying that leaves themselves don't just rot just like that because of lack of oxygen. They don't just suffocate, but they can get infected if they have a little bruise from a little pest, or maybe a little scratch from you moving it around. And especially in moist conditions, especially if you mist or splash water on the leaves, they can get infected with all sorts of pathogens, bacterial, fungal in nature. It really depends. Signs look a little similar. Usually the bacterial infections are a little bit more common than the fungal ones. And in this case, you will see some yellowing splotches or even like transparent splotches on the leaf that are progressing day by day until at some point the entire leaf is yellow and even falls off. In some cases, it doesn't even like dry. It doesn't have time to dry. It just yellows and it looks a little mushy and a little weird and it just falls off. Now, in that case, we are dealing with an infection. We can stop infections from spreading if we act before they actually take over the entire leaf. And I have some videos on it. You can check them down below. But again, infections, depending on the case and depending how you treat your orchids, they're not very common. I would encourage you not to start splashing water everywhere unless you know you have wind in your living room or you have a grow room with a lot of fans going and so on. And even then, sometimes it still happens to me to get a few infections here and there. So that can happen as well. It's treatable, happens to all of us, but obviously it's not a normal yellowing of leaves. Then, of course, we have pests. And some pests are better at making yellow leaves than others. For example, spider mites. They're so tiny and inconspicuous. By the time you notice you have an infestation, already you have some leaves that are affected. They might even be yellow and just fall to the ground. Obviously, if pests damage a leaf to such an extent that it cannot sustain itself and it does not perform, either the orchid gives up on that leaf and sheds it, either the leaf itself cannot benefit from the juices, let's say. It cannot work anymore. And it starts to develop chlorotic spots even, or it starts to die off from the tip or next to the stem. It really depends. But obviously pests are a factor as well. Usually in these instances, you kind of notice some other signs as well, such as grazing, or maybe you even see the pests like the mealybugs and other things on your plant. It happens. So definitely if you let a pest infestation out of hand, you'll have yellow leaves in no time. We're getting to the end here. Other diseases. And in this instance, I will put viruses. Viruses, again, are not a very common thing that you will deal with, especially if you don't share water or you sanitize your tools in between cutting flower spikes or leaves or in between orchids. You're not going to deal with it too much. There are some pests that can carry viruses, but it's not very common that you're gonna have some virused orchids. I did have at some point, and the orchids were simply not performing, or they had some weird spots on their leaves, and those leaves, which displayed like the spots, they would yellow faster, or they would have chlorotic spots that would take over, and then the entire leaf would be yellow and fall. It happens. It's just not very common. So in order to properly diagnose a virus infection, we need test kits. And I had the privilege of actually having some Agdia test kits like 12 years ago. I don't have access to them anymore. But testing is a good way, or the only sure way to know if you have a virus orchid. There are parts of the world in which you have like actual laboratories where you can send samples and they will test it for you. I'm not in one of those countries. But anyway, that's the only like sure way of knowing if your orchid is virused. But there are some other signs as well, such as loss of vigor, also losing leaves without any actual reason. That could be, a sign that you might have a virus. But again, it's just very uncommon. You should just look out for it. And before we end the subject, not a cause, but just a little tip on how to remove the yellowing leaves. Well, it depends on the instance. If you have a leaf that it's just falling normally, I personally do not advise you to cut it, simply because, again, I'm not a fan of just opening wounds when I can just wait a little longer and the leaf will just detach on its own. Many orchids, exception being usually slipper orchids, they will have an abscission line. What is this line? It's a line that it's purposely weaker, where if a leaf yellows or it has to fall, it will just split from there very easily. Now, when the leaf is green, you can pull on the leaf, it's not gonna detach from there, you will rip the leaf. But once the leaf is yellow or it's even a little dry, if you just pull a little bit on the leaf, it will snap from that abscission line, which orchids have adapted to have in order to protect their vital structures, such as stems and axis. And in the case we're dealing with an infection, I totally forgot to talk about this, we absolutely must cut the leaf in order to prevent the infection from advancing and taking over the entire leaf or even reaching stems and rhizomes. Now, in this case, when we cut a portion of an infected leaf, it is important to cut in good tissue. If we leave any bit of the infection behind, it will still continue to take over the remaining leaf and reach vital structures. So unlike with cutting of dried roots, when we cut infected leaves or sick leaves, we have to leave about, I would say, 0.5 centimeter or maybe even 1 centimeter of good tissue in the portion that we cut as well, just to make sure we do not leave any bit of infection behind. Anyway, you will have an entire video about this down below in the description, but yeah, I just wanted to mention it because I forgot to mention it in the video that I filmed. So that is the end of my list. I hope this video helped you out. I will insert footage where I have, of course, in this discussion. And I hope this video answered some of your questions if you had. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you rePotme for sponsoring yet another video of the series. And with that said, I hope you'll have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!